Reverend John T. Coates II, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. My mama named me John, so please feel free to call me John. That's what all my friends do. So it's just good to see you.
It's great to see you. So we have some history, and I'm trying to think of when we met.
I remember.
Okay, yeah.
I worked for Saga Broadcasting and Columbus Radio Group for almost 16 years. And it was either during the WVKO days or during the smooth jazz days. I worked in the back end and the business side. And I remember meeting you in relationship to a CD release that you were doing at the King Arts Complex. Okay. And I had the opportunity, was in the ballroom, and I had the opportunity of meeting your father. And he told me about how you started when you were really young and how he supported you and fostered you through. And he was just really proud, because this wasn't your first CD. This was like your second or third CD release, and it just real excitement around not just that you were releasing a new CD, but because that you were an excellent musician that was also pushing the academic side as well. It was just a real exciting time, and to hear someone's parent kind of speak really high of and just proud of you was what I remember feeling as he was talking about your history and his involvement in your career. So that was just real good.
Yeah, I think that was this thing that my wife. It was like my birthday / CD release.
Yes.
And I think that would have been Sacramental.
Wow.
I think that was the name of that project, and I wrote. I composed 6 compositions for jazz quartet and chamber orchestra.
I mean, you and Winton. When I think about your musicianship, I think about Wynton Marsalis, and a good musician. You just can't stick you into a box. And as it relates to genre, you just can't put you into a box. And now we've learned over the last several years, or watching you closely, is that, hey, guess what? He plays more than saxophone. Well, and I'm like, wow. I enjoy hearing you on B flat clarinet. I really enjoyed that segment you did on clarinet, and I'm an old marching band, jazz band person. I played tenor saxophone, flute, and of course clarinet and B-flat clarinet in the concert band. And I was raised in church, so my instrument of choice and of preference is the Hammond organ. Now I used to say B3, but that's not my favorite console. It is the A100 with a Leslie 150 tone cabinet attached to it. It's compact. It feels just really, really comfortable. Especially most of my life, I weighed about 150 pounds, dripping wet. Not anymore, but I just felt real comfortable on that console. And I think Trina Washington, the infamous Trina Treen, I think she prefers the A100 console as well.
Yeah, there's some different models. It's easy to lose track, but there's a few of them that are great, and they might as well be a B3.
Yeah.
So. And I think that I'm trying to think of which project. So Sacramental, I think Sacramental is my. I think that was my 8th project.
Wow, it's that far down the line, good Lord. Now, how old were you when you recorded your first project?
I was 14.
14 years old.
And
wow.
Yeah, so that was in, let's see, 14 would have been, I think that project came out in 89, and it was an actual record.
Wow, a real vinyl.
It was a real vinyl. Now, of course, they brought records back, but this is before records were out, right? But they were sort of being pushed out by CDs. So my second project and then all subsequent projects, except for the most recent, were released as CDs. The most recent. Oh yeah. I think I recognize some of that. But my most recent project was I released it initially on SoundCloud, and then I put it on YouTube. It's a classical project. It was all Marcel Mule commission works. It's a project that I did in fulfillment of my doctorate at University of Cincinnati.
Wow. So how are people selling music now? It used to be, I remember you could produce a CD, pay about $1,200 to a CD company, have it printed, wrapped, and everything, and barcoded, and could sell them out of the trunk of your car. And finding the big distributors. When there used to be record stores, remember Peaches? Anybody remember Peaches? Crazy. In Walmart, Kmart, when people are selling CDs. But how do you sell a CD now? It's like, do you sell it just track by track on one of the digital formats?
People are still doing CDs. I think that there is obviously the streaming thing is totally taken everything over. And I don't remember the year, but it's sort of an interesting time when the sales of records eclipsed CDs.
Wow.
Right. I'm not talking about 89 and before then, when stuff was on vinyl and CDs were being introduced. I'm saying CDs, because of streaming, have been so reduced in sales, and everything is bought with some kind of license or some kind of streaming service, to where when records started to come back, turntables, there's a year where records actually sold more than CDs.
Incredible.
Which is ridiculous.
Well, we like the warm sound of an LP. We grew up with the big record players that were a piece of furniture, two great big speakers in it, and the little glowing radio tuner, and the record player had a switch on it rather if it played a 78 or it's just real fascinating time. I don't think I came to really appreciate the digital sound of CD until Ahmad Jamal recorded Digital Works. And when you take the first recording or the live recording of Passiana, and then you listen to the Digital Works studio version of it, and it's just clean. I mean, it was it was just super clean. It's just, and I really came to appreciate the clarity of what a CD could offer as far as music. And then things started getting real bad, because you began to hear recording quality some people's projects. And it's like, oh, they never took the hiss out. Then people start building floating studios and everything, and then things went from RCA jacks to actually being firewired or what have you. It's just the technology has really made things clearer and really less expensive now. Where it was really expensive, now I can I'm amazed what I can even do with my Adobe Audition, even when it used to be Cool Edit Pro on Centril.
Thank you so much for watching my video so far. If you'd like to support, there are several ways to do so below. Also, likes are free. Please comment, share, and subscribe. Now back to the video.
Cool Edit Pro on Centrillium. It's just amazing what can be done at home.
It is quite amazing. So technology has this way of creating more opportunities, and as technology has reduced in cost, more people have been able to put records out, produce recordings. And I think there is a plus and a minus to that. So the plus is that, like we said, more access. And the plus to social media, YouTube, Spotify, all the different ways that you can release your music and have SoundCloud and have instantaneous access to everyone in the world. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
That stuff, that is, that there's a plus there. The minus is that we used to have sort of gatekeepers that, good, bad, or indifferent, mm-hmm. had control of, what, the control of who got the contracts of the music that was, going to be playing on the radio.
Right.
I mean, they had control of that. So,
well, playlists have always been small. Most places never really had a giant playlist unless they were an independent station. Right. So that really limited. But it was difficult to get your record past CD Baby. Are they still around?
CD Baby's still around.
Wow.
I think part of what CD Baby does now is part of their, part of what they do is they'll release your project also like on YouTube.
Okay.
So that's part of their, and a lot of these companies, I mean, you can't fight that. What are you going to do? I mean, you can put, put your head in the sand and pretend like, everything's like it used to be. It's not like it used to be. And it's never going to be like it was before.
No.
One thing that's happened over this pandemic, during this pandemic, is you see a lot of folks that didn't necessarily have a lot of technology savvy develop technology savvy as a matter of survival.
Well, some people did a good job at it, and others, they're still kind of struggling along. It's like I listen to churches, and you're like, okay, now at some point you're going to get some cameras. They don't have to be real expensive cameras, but you're going to get some cameras. At some point, you're going to move to more than one camera, because you can set up 3 telephones, okay, that's on a switcher system that you can operate like a 3-camera system on cell phone app technology. And then at some point, you're going to figure out, hey, guess what? If you have lighting, you're going to have better resolution. And then at some point, you're going to run in your sound through the soundboard.
Right. It's like baby steps.
Right.
Been the minister of music at Second Baptist for
3 years or 4.
It might be coming up on 5 years.
Wow.
I was looking at the calendar and I was like, no. Well, I guess I could say this year doesn't count.
Oh no, this year counts. Oh no, last year counted. Let me tell you why last year counts. Last year's counts. Number one, let me say this for the record, is that of all of the online services that everyone's streaming services in some form or fashion now, Second Baptist is one of the services that I enjoy. And the reason that I enjoy it, now, first of all, church is shorter now. For those of you that didn't like the 3-hour service, I'm a Pentecostal preacher. We get in there and we'll huck and buck for a long time. But church is shorter now. But what I really enjoy about these Second Baptist services is that, first of all, the music's on point. Okay, the music's just on point. Mary Horde on the organ. You're there playing saxophone, keys, singing solos, okay, and the choirs are gone. You have a praise and worship team that you can really tighten down on now, because streaming is like recording. That microphone's not going to lie on you. Okay,
right.
It means singing live is different from singing.
Facts.
So I enjoy the music department. I enjoy Dr. Washington. He can preach, he can sing, and it's not what you would expect from Columbus's oldest Baptist church and the second oldest black church in Columbus. It's not what you would expect. I'm like, wow, this is good. And this is really good. And I enjoy the service. I enjoy the production of it. Even I was watching the installation service for the Baptist Pastors Conference, which Dr. Washington is now the president of. I enjoyed "Oh Happy Day" at the end. I mean, it just sounds real good, and I applaud you for work and your entire team for what y'all have put in over there as far as sound, and also the reception that my parents attend second, and my stepmother came home. I said, Renee, I said, did you know that Shawn Thunder Wallace is your choir director? And she said, yes. And it's wonderful. And she's getting her section parts and everything. My brother's enjoying it. It's just, they were excited to receive you there, and it just seems like everything kind of gelled together. It's hard to get people excited in church sometimes, and especially people that might have been used to doing something a certain way for a long time, and then to have someone as innovative as yourself come into a traditional Baptist church, and turn it out in baby steps. But I enjoy it.
Well, thank you, man. I appreciate that.
Bless you.
It has been a process, and we're still in the process. Of course, when the pandemic hit, we were using some of my cameras, some of my webcams, and with Zoom, using Zoom, and so that sort of that was happening for about a month or so, and then we got to get some cameras and that whole thing, and now we have a full-time sound guy. Good. Who's actually one of my students, one of my former students from Ohio State.
How long did it take them to realize that soundboard is an instrument?
Right. So when I took the job there, one of the first things I said was, we need a full-time sound person. That was. Oh no,
we need to set the knobs and leave them there.
Right.
Who touched
That was
these?
the first thing that I said. Well, it was one of the first things that I said, and it took a while before we got to the place where it's a budgeted thing. You had to figure out how to make it happen, and so we made it happen, and Pastor Washington is probably maybe between him and Craig Allen, who's the worship arts pastor at Vineyard Columbus, probably between those two for as far as the best boss that I've had, working in church, easily. I mean, he's, of course, Pastor Washington has that musical background. And
that helps.
And he was doing what I'm doing, plus being the pastor for a couple years before I arrived, and so he was able to give me really specific information, but he's not pushy or anything, and and he suggests stuff, and I'm a planner and I'm organized, and so I like to I'll get the schedule out and we know what's happening, we can see what's happening, everything's on paper, so there's sheet music, there's a Dropbox that has audio and sheet music in it. There's separate Dropboxes, one for the praise and worship team, one for mass choir, one for the youth and young adult choir, there's a calendar. I put together a Google Calendar so we know when rehearsals and stuff are. And I think what happens is, at first, I think people are kind of like, what's up with all of this, whatever. But then you start to depend on it because it's, it has all of the information. It says what the dress code is. It says what the call time is. It says,
and it has your part. It has your part, and that's
and YouTube links to all of the songs that we do. Yeah. So I think that that kind of approach, I think we're starting to see that more in the Black church. I think we're starting to see it more, but I'm sure I'm still the minority.
Well, I remember when first of all, nobody read music. And I'm talking about in the Pentecostal church. In the Baptist church, you always had readers. In the Methodist church, you always had readers. But in the Pentecostal church, nobody read a stitch of music. They would know generally what key they were playing in. And they wasn't on a finger system. They wasn't on a 3/5 and whatever. No. You would listen to a CD or a cassette. No, I remember listening to cassettes and hearing through a produced cassette that may have been multiple tracks on it, and rewinding it, learning the parts, to not only just the choral parts, the choir parts, the vocal parts, but learning the instrumental parts, not getting it right.
Oh, yeah.
And then, of course, changing the key.
I'll tell you one thing that has produced so many great musicians is all of this learning everything by ear, and then this expansive memory, this oral memory of all of this music in intricate detail. What is it? What was it called? The telephone game or whatever?
Right.
Where you say something to the person next to you, whisper it to them, and
it changes every right.
Right, and it changes. By the time it gets to the end, it's like the color's not even the same color that you said. Everything is different. Often that is used as a way to delegitimize anything that's not written down. Right. So it's reinforcing this sort of westernized concept of, if it's not on paper, it's not real. Okay. But what I actually think that telephone game actually illustrates is not necessarily that if it's not on paper, it's not real. It just shows how far we've fallen. Because the whole oral tradition, there is scores and scores of information that has been faithfully transmitted
orally
without any changes, orally, since the beginning. Right. Part of the way that happens is through this master-apprentice relationship. Another way that happens is through unbroken apostolic succession. That's a way that information can be transmitted and continued on, even stuff that was never written down. And what I actually think that the telephone game shows us is that our ability to remember things orally and retain them has significantly eroded. So that's actually my thought on the telephone game, as opposed to the thought that, well, see, this shows you that if you don't write it down, it means you can't trust it. If it's not written down, it's not trustworthy. Now, don't get me wrong, with an eroded society with respect to the ability to remember things in great detail accurately, we probably do need to rely on stuff being written down. But that's another point.
How long did it take for you and Mary to gel? Because here you have a phenomenal musician. And sometimes someone else comes in. You've been carrying the load musically for a long time, and then you get some help. How long does it take for that to gel? And was she playing with a bass player before?
I think years and years ago there was a bass player, but I think that may have been before Mary was there.
Okay.
But no. I mean, the instant.
Wow.
She was ready. Amos is there also. Amos Horde is the drummer, and we I think gelled right away. I mean, we're constantly getting more used to each other. But one of the benefits of the small local church, where you don't have so many members that the pastor can't have some sort of relationship with all of the members, where you need a staff of pastors,
right,
provide care for the congregation. The benefit of a small church is that all of the same folks are at every service.
Wow.
And so you just get this community thing, and it happens quickly. It's one of my sort of pet peeves that I've talked about on this program before, about mega church is not that's not the biblical model. That's putting it mildly. But if you have to change teams, if you have to have, and I'm not trying to, I'm not saying this about any place in particular. This is just a general statement. But if you have to have praise and worship band A, praise and worship band B, praise and worship band C, praise and worship band D, and so on, if that's the case, and or if your community is so large that you don't ever serve together. Okay. Everybody's almost nobody's, no time everybody's together. I think that you significantly diminish your, the sort of gelling in cohesion and, the kind of hand and glove kind of fit. You're going to have a hard time developing that.
You're very organized, and of course you realize and and you've practiced that there's a big organizational, administrative backside, and even preparing all the drop stuff that goes into the drop boxes. How many hours do you think you actually put in a week in that? Some people think you just show up and play on Sunday.
It's dependent. Different churches, different positions I've had have been different. I was when I was at Vineyard Columbus, I was working 25 hours a week, and so that included 3 services. So that was part of the 25 hours, and it included a day of meetings, and then some other time writing music and getting organized and whatnot. At Second Baptist, the way I have, I'm a fan of organization because it significantly reduces the amount of time that you need to spend. Wow. I mean, you don't have to recreate the wheel every time. If you can keep track quickly of, okay, well, what songs did we do last week? What songs did we do a year ago today?
You can look and see.
That's right. What songs did we do 2 years ago for Easter? Maybe I can grab one of those songs. what hymns did we do? You know, what hymn did we do in, I don't know, December of 2017?
Wow.
2018 or whatever.
And you're digitized. So, and you're digitized.
That's right. There's a record of it. And so it makes it, and then also in the software that I use, now we're all in-ear monitors, the band is. Mm-hmm. And so we play with production sequences, you know, click tracks and cues that are happening in our ears. And I'm using Ableton Live to run the services. And so, you know, Ableton Live remembers what the last things that I played was. You know, I have this huge master list, and I just drag the stuff up to the top of the list that we're going to do for that service, and this stuff is all in order. There you go. I mean, I look at the, okay, what did we, you know, I get there on, you know, Sunday morning after I get everything set up. I say, okay, what are the songs we're doing today? All right, well, where's the email that I sent out that had all the songs in it? All right, then okay, now those songs are in order, and I'm not, and everything's on my iPad as far as sheet music, and I have a foot pedal. Mm-hmm. You know, so there you go. It just makes it a lot less time intensive having everything on sheet music also. So for instance, preparing for a rehearsal is nowhere near as time consuming if you have everything on paper. Otherwise, so say for instance, I didn't have the songs on paper. Okay, I got to learn all the parts. I got to remember all the parts so that I can teach the parts. And that is just not efficient.
Right.
It just takes, you know, it's going to take a lot of time getting the stuff together. And so even if I transcribe something, arrange something, even when I do that, the amount of time that it takes initially to do that, I get to reuse that over and over and over. Mm-hmm. So that time is, it's, you know, you're paying it forward, right?
Right.
The future me really likes that I spent that time.
Well, you might be playing with a click track, but I know that you have what I call an orchestrative ear. Were you born with it, or did the instrument of the orchestra, did it develop over time in hearing more than just your instrument, hearing the bass line, hearing horn licks, hearing the chord padding, and in the instrumentation? Were you just born with it, or did it develop over a time period?
Yeah, no, I was not born with a clarinet and a map of Europe. No, I you know, I mean, I started when I was really young. My dad was a great saxophone player. My dad was my teacher until I went to college.
Wow.
I got, you know, starting at 6, I got 3 lessons a week and an attentive ear to my practicing. Nope, that's not what you're supposed to be practicing. You slow that down. You're making mistakes there, you know. Mm-hmm. And so you know, that was important, and he had a very specific idea of the kinds of things I should be working on and what skills he thought necessary for me to you know, reach my potential. So we spent equal time on learning stuff by ear and listening as we did, and playing stuff by ear and playing stuff on the page. Wow. So both sides of the instrument, classical and jazz. Those were the traditions we focused on the most. And, you know, it wasn't actually until I was in college that I actually really started playing in church.
Oh, wow.
And I interviewed Joel Brooks Jr., who has a church called Stone Church in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Mm-hmm. It used to be called Christian Life Center. Yeah. It's a Pentecostal, you know, Word of Faith kind of, you know, kind of church. And he was a fine musician himself and a touring keyboardist. And I started playing there. My first full-time job in church was a church gig, and that was 2001.
Wow.
2001, they offered me a job. That was right after I finished my master's. Joel Brooks, he offered me a job. I was his assistant and the band director at the church. And the church was a pretty big church, 2,000, 2,500 members, something like that. And but I also started composing and arranging when I was really, really, really young. So, I mean, I don't remember most of this, but supposedly I was composing when I was 7. And listening to a lot of music, really interested in how the instruments function. Part of the reason why I play various instruments, different instruments, is because I'm sort of borrowing from the composer's strategy. And that is, if I'm going to write something for clarinet, then I should take lessons on clarinet. To learn, even if I don't play clarinet, right? You learn the instrument because you want it to sound like you know the instrument. You know all the nuances about the instrument. Mozart's clarinet concerto. It's obvious that he studied the clarinet. You can't write for clarinet the way that he did in that piece without having studied
the ability to play it.
That's right. So, and in particular, I'm interested in hybrid works. Hybrid works are sort of classical and jazz. They have a traditional component, they have an improvised component. They're mixing traditional instruments and commercial instruments. So that would include stuff like, orchestration over a pop tune.
Okay.
Or stuff like what we started talking about, which was Sacramental, that project, which is a jazz quartet with chamber orchestra.
Wow.
So I'm interested in that kind of stuff.
One of my favorite pianists is the very beautiful Hazel Scott, and she would perform that way, not necessarily with the pieces merged all the time. She would start off maybe with a classical place and song, and then go into a swing or something, but I love to hear that type of hybrid fusion, if you will. It's it's satisfying. It's modern, and in sound, and we hear a lot of it in church. The hymn would be considered a sacred piece of music, a classical songs that musicians have done a lot with over the years, and didn't necessarily, none of it was written, none of it was really even planned out. Some of it just flowed, and some of it might not have been a performance piece. Some of the stuff happens while people are talking. I mean, talk music, we call it.
Right.
There's amazing things that happen during talk music.
Well, let's talk about what the services used to be at Second Baptist Church before the pandemic, and we, as you suggested, the service is much shorter now. But any given Sunday, I mean, I was programming 14, 15 selections, something like that.
Wow.
Right? So you have so we were doing 3 praise and worship selections, then a hymn, then let's talk about first Sunday.
Okay, first Sunday. So you do so you do a 25 to 30 minute set on the front end. Praise and worship.
Well, the praise and worship actually is more like 15 minutes.
Okay.
And then, like I said, we do a hymn, and of course, there's stuff in between this, right? Everything is worked out, right? It's a litany, that and it's worked out. So, there'd be a welcoming prayer, There would be a selection that we did for a fellowship, and people are walking around. You know, there's a selection, you know, let the church say amen at the end of the benediction. There's a song that we did for the altar call. You know, there's a song that we did for, you know, obviously you've got the doxology.
Right.
You know, you have, so if the choir's on, the mass choir's on, so say the mass choir would do an A and B selection. Say if it's first Sunday, then we do a communion selection, 2 of them usually. And I'm there's probably 3 or 4 things that I didn't say. Right?
Now, did you know all of the music and or a great portion of it, or did you learn a lot of the music as you went along? You know, like this songs that I grew up with. You know, I know it was the blood. You know, all the communion, we call them the blood songs. All the communion stuff, and you just you know it, and you know generally what. Most people play most of the stuff in this same general keys or what have you, and you just flow with it. But did you have to learn some of this music? Because I know when I was born Baptist, and when I was recruited into the Church of God in Christ, I had to learn some of that stuff, because there's songs that people were, especially during the notorious devotional session, where folks would get up and just sing and testify and sing, and it would be in every key but Z. And sometimes the key is Z. I'm like, wait a minute, you're in between keys. And just have to play it. And that's how I learned. I learned the music of the Pentecostal church during the devotion period, when people would get up and actually sing.
That's interesting, because the kind of churches that I grew up in were more kind of Pentecostal word of faith kind of churches, and so not Kojic, but somewhat influenced by that. In particular, the church I worked at in Kalamazoo, which was called Christian Life Center, there was definitely influence of that there. So I would learn. So I learned a lot of that there. But as far as like the Baptist thing, I came into that much later. Now, when I got to Second Baptist, most of this, you remember I worked at it's where I met my wife, New Salem. I worked at New Salem for 1.5 years. And so I learned a lot of hymns and stuff when I was there. And so a lot of the songs that we do were quite familiar to me. Of course, there's a few that it's kind of, man, I hadn't heard that one yet.
The 10 hymns the church sings. Look, was it 10, or was it how many hymns were the frequent hymns that the church would say?
I had a list. I don't have it on me right now. Well, I mean, it's in my computer somewhere, but I'm not looking at it. But when I took the job at Second Baptist, Pastor Washington gave me a
songbook?
It was a printout. No, it was a printout, and it had all of the hymns that they had done for the last year. Okay, and what he was doing is he was basically doing a different hymn every Sunday. Okay, now that's not the usual. That isn't the usual, at least in the modern times. That's not the usual. Often you would try to make the hymn sort of match with the sermon, right? So you try to play off that. And so I think that was part of the reason why there was a lot of variance in what the hymns was. One thing I did was, okay, we're gonna do the same thing that New Salem was doing, which is to do a hymn per month. And so then I just used basically that collection of hymns, and that gave me a lot of stuff to say, okay, I mean,
what does that mean? You sing the same song for 4 Sundays?
Right.
Okay.
For a whole for a whole month. And it works well because you get to the, by the time you get to the third Sunday, everybody really is singing the hymn.
And they're free. They know it, and they write.
That's right. And rather than sort of you do a different one, and even if people really know it, and especially at a church like Second Baptist where there's only one service. That's right. There's only one service. Some people are like, really? There's a church that only has one service?
Wait a minute. You just advertised.
Right.
Upon the reentry, you want one service Sunday, go to the second.
That's right. One service and that's it. We in and out. And I have one rehearsal day, one service.
Wow.
And then I meet with Pastor Washington the same day is the rehearsal. There it is. That's the schedule, and that's a lot different. It's much better. It's much healthier for my family. My son is 7. It's much healthier for my family than 25 hours that I was spending. And remember, that's on top of my full-time thing at Ohio State.
You're a professor.
Studies at Ohio State.
Right.
So, by the way, so it's. Yeah, it's interesting.
Now, Dr. Wallace, are you what department are you in at OSU? Are you in the Black Studies department or the music department? School music.
Yep. And of course, it's been very interesting the way that this pandemic has affected that. But here, so I want some more history on you, and that's really what we're here to talk about.
Well,
so why don't you talk a little bit about how you grew up and some early experiences, and maybe try to come to a place where maybe ministry seemed like that was a call in your life, and yeah.
Well, I'm a native here of Columbus, Ohio, but both of my parents, I should say all 3 of my parents, are from the South. My father and my stepmother are both from Mississippi, 2 totally different parts of that state. She's from Macon. He's from a little town called Hollandale. My mother is from the deep South. She's from a little town called Harleyville, South Carolina, which is about 50 miles north of Charleston. And she's Geechee to the core, okay? I mean, like straight up. And having parents from the South that really, both of them worked as sharecroppers, and both of them pulled themselves out of the abject poverty that they were raised in into really great success. My mother's is a physicist by degree. My father's basically an electrical engineer, an absolute genius. He's the smartest person I know, because of what I know, his ability and what he's actually has done. And he's an engineer, not a technician. He's an engineer. A technician fixes stuff. Will use a schematic and look at it and replace a panel or whatever. My father, if there's no fix for it, he'll create something new that will work. Be it if it's a tool, he'll create it. If it's a new wiring, if it's the drawing of a schematic, he'll create it. If he needed to silver coat it, he'll silver coat it. And he's that way with anything that he comes into contact with. I remember when computers were introduced, he was writing code, and he's been a ham operator for as long as I can remember, to be B8 LAP. And we always had a tower in our backyard, and he's moon bouncing and talking. We talked to people all over the world. Whenever there was a space expedition, we were able to listen to it on the ham radio. My stepmother impacted my life severely. because she is a social worker, and the hours that she put in for the care of the kids that would come through her care or responsibility. But the impact was, I saw her write checks to Klan Watch and to the Southern Poverty Law Center and to the NAACP, and the crisis magazines and stuff came to the house in her name. And I was exposed to that through her. I got a chance to hear stories through her, and it opened up just a whole new form of conversation. So as a kid growing up, I loved fascinated by politics and community involvement. We grew up in church, so I loved church, loved God, all that stuff. But the community was important as well, and I knew that most of the stuff that we would advocate for from a community basis, a lot of that stuff was answered through those folks that were elected or appointed to political office. So you know, I said, wow, let's influence these people. So I remember my first political campaign was the mayoral campaign of Dr. John Roseman, my mother's physician, who had served on Columbus City Council and decided to run for mayor. And I went door to door throughout our subdivision for Dr. John Roseman. My parents were very free with me. I could travel the city. You know, look, it was the bus system was worked, and I could travel the city, and I spent a lot of my days at the state house and was meeting people and just really having a ball and engaged in the community, without my parents not really worrying about where I was, what I was doing. They knew it was okay. And I remember in 1976, I believe, one of my father's friends, Les Brown, decided to run for state representative. And we got a chance to work on his campaign. When he was elected to office after school, many days of the week, I would go down to the state house and help him out. And I learned the legislative process at a young age. I learned I met people that I otherwise would not have met. Senators, state representatives. I walked into James Rhodes' office when I was about 11 years old or younger, and he had a pretty receptionist at the desk. She's a lawyer now. Her name is Shelley Clark, and I said, I want to meet the governor. I want to get the governor's autograph. And she said, wait a minute. She went into the back, got a picture of James Rhodes, and it was autographed to me, and came out. She said, come back here for a minute. And they had a electric buzzer for the bench, and they buzzed it, let me through, and there was James Rhodes. And got a chance to spend a lot of time with Governor Rhodes. And it just, the exposure was great. So on one hand, I have the revolutionary, if you will, of Les Brown and the whole black community. On the other hand, I'm exposed to James Rhodes and his friends like John Galbraith and other people. And I kind of got the opportunity to see a whole lot and come to an understanding at a young age. Then 1984 creeped up on us. 1984 came, and on November 22nd, 1983, the Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson, and I'm praying for Jesse right now. He was rushed to the hospital. He's out of the hospital now. He's in a rehab facility, and he had an emergency surgery of some sort, and I'm just praying that he's okay. But in November 22nd, 1983, he came to East High School and announced his candidacy for President of the United States. Place was absolutely packed. Now, of course, that date, November 22nd, it may ring familiar because on November 22nd, 1963, John Fitzgerald Kennedy was killed in Dallas, Texas. And Jesse announced his candidacy at East High School on November 22nd, 83, and the place was jam-packed. There was excitement and buzz in the air, and I worked on his campaign as a youth coordinator here locally, and I've just met a lot of people, formed a lot of relationships during that time, and it just impacted me, and I just stayed heavily engaged within community, and of course community and ministry are very much so intertwined. I believe that yes, our souls must be saved, but if we have soul salvation, but our community decays around us, it's very contradictory. So my ministry and my community work are certainly interconnected. So I just stayed involved through the totality thus far, rather, of my life, and again, I thank my parents for a foundation, and for the many mentors, male and female, that I had throughout the years. I had people really take me under their wings, and in so many different areas. I think about, I talk about music. Reverend Dr. Robert Mitchell Simmons, who was the academic dean of the Gospel Music Workshop of America, and he was the pastor for about 5 years or so at the Centenary United Methodist Church, which sat on Long Street and 18th, which was the backside of it, where you would be looking at Second Baptist Church. So when Centenary moved, they sold the land that they were in to Centenary. To Second Baptist. But Dr. Simmons, my God, and he wrote a book called Good Religion. You should get it, where he talks about the history of gospel music, and him being the academic dean of the Gospel Music Workshop of America, founded by the late great Reverend James Cleveland, which was, the whole convention was choir central. Thousands of people, 16, 17, 18,000 people would join together for this musical conference. So the whole record industry would come together. The choir music, and by the way, black choir music, or the choir music in the black church, was distributed by way of convention. So choir directors and pastors would go to these musical conventions, and they would have a song that would be demonstrated. And then if the people liked the song, they would get the sheet music. So at the Gospel Music Workshop of America, there might be a mass choir of 2,000-3,000 people, and they're made up of choir directors and musicians. Everybody, when they registered, a part of the registration was the purchase of the sheet music, and then that sheet music would make its way out. Now, you all may be familiar with the song "Order My Steps" in your word, written by Glenn Burley. That's a song that was sung in many churches throughout America before it even hit the radio. 10 years before it even hit the radio. It was a song that was distributed by way of sheet music that choirs were singing all over the country, and there's many songs like that that were distributed. But so it was just a fascinating to be exposed to that, and I'm grateful for everything Dr. Simmons taught me. He made sure that I could at least read a lead sheet. I can read music as it related to playing my saxophone, my clarinet, my flute, but I could not read chords, printed chords. So he sat me down and made sure that I had the ability. I had to take intermediary music, and that I could read chords. And then got to the ability where I could write lead sheets for in different keys for various instruments, and and I appreciate it. I really appreciate him doing that. When I was coming through school, computers was still called keyboarding. They were still teaching us how to type, and when computers was introduced, I learned computer technology through my community engagement. I had a mentor by the name of political mentor by the name of Cornell Howard McCleary, and he sat us down and said, "Look, we need to write these press releases, and you have to learn how to use this equipment." And I remember we learned on WordPerfect. Remember, there was WordPerfect was big before Microsoft Word. Corel, WordPerfect, and it was a blue screen, and we had a paperback book that you would turn the pages on, look for codes and commands in order to make bold print or to italicize or to or to block out everything. It was just fascinating before the GUI screen, what we called a GUI screen, came out. They actually had buttons and tabs on it or what have you. So we learned the old-fashioned way and just kept up with technology. When I went into radio in the late 90s, I was fascinated by the recording apparatuses that were used, because radio was still very much so reel-to-reel as it related to production. And then production moved to carts, which is basically like an 8-track tape that you would record on and could erase and record over, what have you. Carts was used in the industry, but I learned how to take a razor blade and slice tape, and then take a piece of studio tape, the editing tape, and put it back together again. And it sounded great. It sounded great. But when digital software was introduced, the first piece of software that I learned was a software called Cool Edit Pro. It was made by a company called Centrillium, and Audition. Adobe brought it out, purchased it, and renamed it Audition. I'm proficient on it, and I'm also proficient in Pro Tools as well. So, and I stayed after work. For a year, and the production managers, thank you, Dan Trapp, would, one of the classic voices of Central Ohio Broadcasting, taught me production after work. So after maybe 6 o'clock, 6:30 at night, we'd be in there till 8 o'clock, and he was showing me how to use this software because I had the desire to produce spots for my clients and to give them the same quality that some of the larger stations would get as well. And that's what I did. And then I was so fascinated with it, the station then built me a studio at home. Behringer, I had a Behringer board, designated computer and everything. So, it was just was able to do some creative things as a result. And I learned how to speak for broadcasting, use my radio voice. And I was doing voiceovers. Then I started producing announcements for churches across the country, especially as the internet kind of picked up and you could send something via MP3. But at that time, I was burning it on a CD and mailing it to the churches around the country. I take full credit. Pat myself on the back for digitizing the Columbus church community. Being in the business side of radio, I had maybe 18, 19 churches as clients, and I digitized those churches. Many of them had been on the radio for years, and really recording reel to reel. On cassette tapes or what have you. So we built them. We made them. We taught them how to record. We brought CD burners. We showed them how to use the auxiliary out jacks to their to their soundboards and run them into. You just was able to. They were able to produce quality recordings And if the choir songs didn't go that well that week, hey, guess what? You can use last week's songs that did go good, and just really had a great time, had a real great time doing that. And that, so that's work, that's recreation for me, and politically, I stayed engaged, and certainly being on the media side, I developed a consultancy where I started consulting businesses as well as candidates from a media perspective on putting together effective spots. Be it if it's, the most of it was audio. In fact, even when I do video stuff now, it's still based on an audio story. So we tell the story, or whatever it is we're trying to convey from an audio perspective, and then we put photographs or B-roll footage or video on top of it. But the basis of the story is still told from an audio script, and I enjoy doing that, and I find it enjoyable. I find it rewarding when you're able to produce something effective. So I've had a great time doing that. From a church standpoint, I started a little church. I'm pastor of the Metropolitan Church of God in Christ. I'm a superintendent of the Capital District. I have about 4 churches in my district here in Central Ohio. I have a church down in Mississippi as well. There's a statewide. I'm the executive secretary for Ohio West jurisdiction. I work directly with the bishop. We have about 50 churches throughout the state, which I help to administrate as well. So I stay busy. I served on the COVID-19 strike force for the state of Ohio. I'm on the opioid overdose task force that's connected to Recovery Ohio. I'm on the Evangelical Pastors Advisory Committee for the governor, as well as I serve on an advisory committee for the Ohio Secretary of State. And it goes on and on and on. It goes on so much where there's too many Zoom calls ready to.
Especially these days.
That's right. These days, like, I lift my hands up and surrender. I'm the elected second vice president of the Columbus branch of the NAACP, and that's like a 24-hour job. Okay, it's gotten ridiculous, but we're able to get a lot accomplished, especially with 2 recent shootings having taken place. It's just real tragic, but we helped lay the groundwork for Columbus Police to be on body cameras. We were laying the groundwork now to make sure that those cameras are on our sheriff's department, and we're pushing for stronger accountability from officers and from community. So you never have a situation again where someone is shot, and once they're deemed not to be a threat any longer, especially an unarmed person, you don't let them lie there and die with no assistance. You're just milling around, and letting somebody die. That never happens again, not just here in Columbus, but hopefully no place else in America.
Yeah, I sent you a video, and that video was it was one of O'Shea Duke Jackson's video, and I interviewed him recently. This is him back here on the screen behind me, and O'Shea made this video, and he basically punched one of the topics of our interview, and that topic was Black church. And so one thing that to notice in the black church is that men are not as in as prevalent numbers as they once were, and there is I think there are some different explanations for that. I think our churches tend to be filled with single mothers, and there are some issues with I think subject matter, often sermon subject matter, where I think a lot of men have felt that maybe the sermons are not particularly tailored to their needs, per se. There's some of that. But there's a sector of YouTube which O'Shea is involved in, and so is Mumia, Obsidian Ali. They are two of the founders of it. It's called the Black Manosphere. And the Black Manosphere is a collection of red pill content creators that have basically taken what was the manosphere and principles of what's called red pill and basically packaged it in and hired other talented content creators to create that kind of content. It's a sphere in YouTube that's existed for about 6 years, and it used to be that black men could go to the barbershop or could go to church or to have sort of frank conversations about things that they were experiencing, and a lot of those sort of places to have these conversations have sort of drastically been sort of curtailed in the stuff that you're allowed to to discuss with frankness. And but the manosphere is one of these places where these frank conversations are occurring with regularity. Now, now most of these guys ain't saved. So the kind of conversation can range anywhere from pretty conducive to regular kind of Christian dialogue, maybe spicy, to pretty anti-organized religion and anti-marriage. The marriage laws don't seem to be particularly favorable to men. The child support, for instance, is something somewhat of a topic. I interviewed Dr. T. Hassan Johnson, who is a real black men's rights activist. Yeah. He sees
black men need activists because we're not represented. We're not represented at all. And that's why in Columbus we've got in with some brothers, and we're starting a black male empowerment program as well, because what you mentioned about the church or referenced, I think, is alluded to rather, is true. The church it seems like it's been designed for women. It seems like that it is feminized. They're and I'm Pentecostal, where they shout and and lose it. It seems like, and I always ask the question, why as a man would I want to lose control of myself? So when a preacher talks about the Holy Ghost, and then the examples of the Holy Ghost that I see is some woman doing cartwheels down the aisles and falling out after her wig is falling off and she's slobbering at the mouth. I don't want that. I don't want that to happen to me. So, I mean, seriously, I don't want that to happen to me. So, but that's what they're getting. The preacher preaching to the sisters, and there's need for black male empowerment in the church, and there's need for black male empowerment in the community. There's need for black male empowerment politically, because everything is wiping us out. It's erasing our very existence, and we have to wake up to that, and respond to it.
One thing is that's happened in our communities is there is this wedge that's being driven between black men and black women. Okay, so if you listen to a lot of these sort of bitter conversations that sort of jaded older black women have with each other about, ain't ish brothers, and Dusties, we're all of these negative things. We're not building anything, and there is this this sort of this divestment movement that some black women have gotten involved with called swirling. And swirler or swirling comes from a book. What is it? Crystal and Kerrison wrote a book called something Swirlers. I can't remember the rest of the title, but her whole thing is, and she's married to a white guy. Her whole thing is she wants black women to open up their options. Now here's the problem. 99% of black women are going to marry a black man,
and that's the statistical fact. That's a fact,
right? Now, I think it's 85% of black men are going to marry a black woman, but only 25% of black women will ever get married. Mm-hmm. And that includes ones that get married and get divorced. That still counts as one of them.
Yeah, which then puts our mothers and the children into poverty.
That's right, and immediately does that.
Two incomes better than one.
That's right. Well, and even if you don't have two incomes, because I'm actually a fan of, the traditional structure that supports the possibility of the woman not having to work, mm-hmm. Because of how much better it is for the family. How much better it is for the kids. And when you go back and you look at these statistics on how marriage, divorce rates and all of that. Now look, I'm in my second marriage. Mm-hmm. All right, and part of this whole red pill thing, it's not intended to be sort of misogynist or anti-woman as much as it is attempting to communicate real issues with the dating market. And the reason that I think that that's important is because the most important relationship that you can have as a man is the one you have with a woman, because that is the potential for creating offspring, which if you don't have offspring, we're not generating more people, you have no society. It's the most important thing. And so this sort of wedge that's being driven between black men and black women, and the kind of targeting that our systems of government are targeting of black men. Now notice that. So this whole thing, these Black Lives Matter protests and all this stuff, was based on a black man getting killed. A black man getting killed, right? George Floyd, a black man getting killed. Notice that it's been totally hijacked, and black men still didn't end up with anything out of this deal.
No, because I don't think that was the intent from the organizers.
Of course not.
The three lesbian by choice, organizers who don't believe in marriage, and have a negative the depiction of the black family, and that has to be looked at. And I think what also we have to consider, and I don't believe it's an excuse. I think as we examine our situation, our dilemma, and not just in America but in the world, is that white supremacy has impacted us in such a way and has conditioned us in such a way as well. So in America, it's always been a policy to, as it relates to black men and black women, to lift the woman up while suppressing the man.
Oh yeah.
Okay, and we have to know and come to terms that that's the game. And I mean, black men aren't the ones that need to understand that. I think black women have to come to an understanding that that's the game that's being played. And when you understand the game that's being played, then we can make adjustments and try to self-correct even what others have successfully imposed on us. And then we perpetuate and not really knowing why. You know, it's like George Clinton. At the Gospel of George Clinton, chapter 1, verse 1, you know, why must I? You have to ask yourself the question sometimes. He asks himself the question, why must I be like that? Why must I chase the cat? Is nothing but the dog in me. You know, that's a self-examination. We need to self-examine and look and see why are we in the condition that we're in, and how can we correct it. But we have to examine what's actually has taken place, and it's not just the conditioning that took place during slavery, but it's the games that were played since then and even now.
I have frequently said that slavery is the thing that got the ball rolling. So, you know, obviously, you know, I'm not going to argue against that. However, I think that what's been most damaging to the black community is forced integration.
Kill black business. Kill black business. For sure. For one thing.
So forced integration. And because prior to forced integration, look at the marital rates in the black community. Beat everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Beat everybody. And, you know, obviously the welfare state is sort of piggybacked on top of this forced integration to, you know, create even but it seems that black women and black men, I can't think of a time in history where, in the history of our country, where we fundamentally disagreed more. Like it's almost like we don't value the same things. We don't care about the same things. The same things are not important to us. And therefore, the Democrats have been able to successfully sort of pander to black women. And so black women are like 100%, hey, we're all for that.
And we get black women to back the election of the granddaddy of mass incarceration.
I know.
It's okay. And it's supposed to be okay.
Like the Killer Cam too.
Right. I'm like, she signed on to the same thing. So you got the Dixiecrat on one hand, and someone that imposed the same type of policies in the state of California, and it's like we sign off on it like it's all right.
Yeah. Minister Japp. So Minister Japp he's not an actual minister. He's like the street ordained minister. Mm-hmm. And he's from Chicago, and he's in the Black Manosphere. Mm-hmm. Something that he frequently says is that the straight, free-thinking black man is the last remaining minority.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you look at all the stuff going on and the way that these policies disenfranchise us, prop everyone else up, use things that happen to us that start a movement to serve other people,
Yeah.
to other groups,
Yep.
you know, and
Yeah, the civil rights legislation that my parents and my aunts and uncles suffered for and others died for has been primarily, now others benefit from what they fought for. And it's good that people could benefit and we make a better nation or what have you, but it really doesn't become better when the oppression becomes so subtle and but yet devastating.
I mean, look at what's happening with the transgender agenda. I mean, the whole LGBTQIA. I'm sure they're adding more
Alphabet.
Yeah. Look at what's happening. So, okay, so this whole Black Lives Matter thing. So you're having, I will say that maybe the first time I can remember, I've been able to actually say things specific to black people and black men in particular without feeling like, first of all, I have felt like some of it has been received, and I haven't felt afraid to say it. Okay, so there has been that. But what I've also noticed is the longer this stuff has gone on, the more these other interests are creeping in. When I was able to have a conversation and focus on the needs of black people, the black community, and talk specifically about what black men need. Now what's happening is it's almost, they feel it necessary to also mention, don't worry about the gay, but what about the gays too? And what about the transgender? And what about the this? Or, and I'm like, if we don't actually focus in on a particular problem without diffusing it by a million,
And that's without even getting into the nitty gritty of some stuff. I happen to believe that there's a chemical feminizing that's going on in our country, chemical, as well as all of the men who are incarcerated long term come home at some point to these communities, not identifying, would never identify themselves as a homosexual, but yet now are engaging in different types of sexual activity, and putting maybe a community at greater risk because of that. And there's nothing to help us when we return back into what we consider a mainstream, which is really a dysfunctional society, to make sure that we're not causing even greater dysfunction within that as well. And there's about to be a mass release, rightfully so, of those that have been overcharged and given longer sentences than they should have been. But guess what? Thousands of people are getting ready to come home. Praise God. But our community is not ready and prepared to receive them. We're not ready and prepared. Where they have to live somewhere, people have to work someplace, and psychologically, we're not ready to really. The church isn't ready. In fact, I think the church is getting ready to sign off on transsexualism, and we're not ready. We're not ready for it, but we've got to get ready quick.
Yeah, that gives me pause, man.
Mm-hmm.
both of those things that you just said. That it gives me pause. You wonder how many of the folks that come back, what percentage of them are going right back to jail?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the first thing. That's the elephant in the room. And then this idea of the church signing off on what it is that you just mentioned.
Well, let me give you an example. Let me just give you a real practical example. The Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock was just elected to the United States Senate, the pastor of the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia. His preacher friends throughout this country endorsed him wholeheartedly because a black preacher was running for the Senate who stands in the same pulpit that Martin Luther King Sr. and Jr. Stood in. And they honored their friend with their support. But when they supported him, did they also support that he was 100% pro-abortion? Did they also support that he believes that marriage can exist between more than just between a man and a woman? That they also support, I mean, you talk about some fundamental Baptist beliefs that you would think that, you know, a member of the National Baptist Convention would have, where they're signing off on this dude's political agenda. I mean, what are we actually saying? Are we supporting a person and not the policy that person supports? And that to me was very scary, because no one even brought anything into question. They're like, oh yeah, this is who we're supporting, without taking the political maturity. And at some stage, I pray that we become political mature and don't get caught up in the personalities of these politicians and who we like and who we don't like. I'll tell you, the thing that's irritating to me is when you note some of those issues, they try to take your race card away. Mm-hmm. Right? So your black card, right? Oh, well, you not black. You ain't black. Look. Right. You ain't black. It goes right to that, rather than, hey, maybe I just have a different opinion than you have. And why is it that I have to think the same thoughts that you think? That's the beginning of the problem of that issue. But the result is the real problem, because you have a bunch of folks. I think there's a lot of different views in the black community, but there's only certain views that get voiced. Yeah. And then there's a lot of bullying that occurs that sort of pushes people into certain kinds. Yeah, but there's a lot of red pilling going on too, and that is we're because of social media, because of the internet. Then even though there's great suppression that's going on, I would say that there's a great awakening that's also happening among black men as well. You mentioned the group of brothers in what's the Manosphere? The Manosphere. The Black Manosphere that's taking place, that's revolutionary. That means that there are conversations, and black men are waking up by each other's calling and by our own voice, not from somebody else calling us our arms or putting ideas in our heads. We're working it out ourselves, and that's significant, and that's what's happening throughout America, is happening throughout this country, is not being broadcasted, is not being reported on. But what happened in the last election, though? Well,
So
what
that's-
happened is what happened in the last election is that let's take the votes that Trump received. He received more black votes than any Republican candidate for president ever received before, and then them votes didn't come from black women; they came from black men.
I know. I know.
Okay, and that's what and that's what we saw in the. When you saw a Lil Wayne or somebody come out, here's a businessman, okay? Here's some people that see what did. Now, I don't agree with Lil Wayne. I don't like his music. I don't like that he's all tatted up and everything. But here's somebody that saw the direction that things were headed in. It's not. It's about black people having an opportunity to have access to real capital and to cut our own paths.
What are they? But look at what they did to Ice Cube. Look at what they did to Ice Cube, man. So
Yeah.
Ice Cube contract with Black America,
Yeah,
and because he was willing to meet with the president,
yeah.
now first of all, he never was a Trump supporter.
No,
Okay, but because you're willing to sit down,
and nor
with
was Steve
the person
Harvey.
that has bound.
And nor was Steve Harvey. But what happens is that you know, look, they can try to shame you if you let them. But what happens is that people that already have demonstrated their goodwill and interest and involvement in our community, yeah, they might try to shame you. But my advice to anybody that the system tries to shame is to keep standing up and keep fighting back, because the work that you have put in prior to the shaming is what has established your so-called ghetto pass, and it will sustain. And if not, go down like a man, because this has got to stop, and it only continues when we don't fight back, don't push back, and don't stand underneath the weight of the pressure that is applied. And it's a lot of pressure that's applied. I remember when the Me Too movement was hit Tavis Smiley. At least he tried to fight back. I remember when Tavis Smiley and Dr. Cornel West began to question the political platform of former President Barack Obama when he was running for president. They wiped him out. They wiped him out. I mean, he lost his position on Tom Joyner Morning Show. I mean, it's just the fight back is, why are they afraid of black men in particular expressing an independent thought? And there is fear surrounding that. J. Edgar Hoover, the former director of the FBI, the first director of the FBI, said the words that he fears the rise of a black messiah. And the word messiah means deliverer. And in the same ideal, I guess, is true today, that there's a fear of the rising of black men in this country and throughout the world. And but when we become aware of that, I think there are baby steps we can take that will begin to secure us. But we have to become mature in the process and really begin to act within our own best interest. And I think that best interest begins with, among black men dealing with black men, number one is that we maximize cooperation amongst ourselves. That we, black men to black man, we have to learn how to cooperate with one another. And secondly, we have to learn to minimize conflict. Minimize conflict, maximize cooperation, minimize conflict, and begin to solve black problems with black thought. I mean, we have to do that, and we have to do that on a neighborhood basis. We have to do that within our homes with our sons, and we have to do that at church. We have to do that, and really put that into practice, because when we begin to show respect in some degree of order amongst ourselves, then that will demand a greater degree of respect from others that's looking at us.
Yeah, that's truth, man. That's facts. So I'm a, I've been a third party voter for probably 15 years or something. And one thing that I notice, I would describe myself as being somewhere between like a black nationalist and a libertarian or something.
Mm-hmm.
There's several things in the Republican platform that I tend to agree with. At least I agree with them more than aspects of the Democratic platform. I tend to be soft on programs, social programs, because a lot of black folks are served by social programs. But I'm pro-life. I'm a Christian. I don't understand how you can not be pro-life. It's not even a real argument. I don't understand this. I know that there's some supposed Christian organizations that are that are pro-choice or whatever, but I don't know how that jives with Christianity. But that's fine. I'm not judging people or anything, but it just doesn't seem to fit. So there's that. There's a sort of kind of like rugged individualism and kind of doing the work, not complaining, bucking up and getting it happening, that I think seems to be more of a more present on the right. And so I tend to, and then there's a whole red-blue thing. So the red pill, blue pill thing, and in this situation, I think the red pill probably would have to belong to the Republicans more than it would to the Democrats. So I see that. I think the thing that's been most devastating to black people, and in particular to black men, about the Democratic Party is the utter embracing of feminism. That has been the thing that has, I think, been the most detrimental to us. I've heard this. I can't remember who said it. It was an article like on Huffington Post or something. I can't remember, but that in the black community, the black man is the white man. I'm not saying it correctly, but
he's the boogeyman.
Right. Well, the black man is the white man of the black community.
Mm-hmm.
So
wow.
In terms of perspective, in terms of basically being a sellout and all of that. That's what they mean by it. I will say this: around every election, national election, you'll see a lot of Democrats in black churches. Mm-hmm. And it always comes across to me as patronizing and not really meaning anything. However, at least they come. At least they show up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You don't see any Republicans. Now, maybe it's because they've decided that it doesn't make good sense as far as how they need to spend their time to get in office. Maybe they have felt that the black community has not been particularly friendly to them or something. I don't know what
they're scared. There's a few things that happened even in our city within the last 10 years that kind of frightened off a lot of Republican candidates from coming to church. And particularly one Republican judicial candidate went to a respected black congregation with a highly esteemed black pastor, and was berated. I mean, he didn't know her, she didn't know him, but he berated her in the congregation. She had her little young daughter with her, and it was just absolutely humiliating, and it scared a lot of people off. Now some of them, before the pandemic, were coming in groups. And they would all sit together in the political section of the church. And they, somebody told them, now when the people stand up, you stand up. So do you see? And then they told them, when they clap, you clap, and it just got to be ridiculous at some point. And even with some of my clients, I refuse to walk them into church. I don't play black church escort. It's like you got to go on your own. Now I'll prepare you to go, because these are some cultural things that you may be unfamiliar with of what happens. So I'll prepare you for that. But you've got to go on your own. You can't go with an escort, because they don't respect you less if they see you with the black guide coming through. You wouldn't use the white guide to go to a white church. So why would you use a black guide to go to the black church? So you're gonna have to go on your own. And I prepared them as to what to expect and to what to do and how to be themselves, and not, don't act out of your own character or what have you. What you gonna do when you see the man run down the aisle? You gonna get up and run down the aisle too? And do the splits in the front and spin around and say, "Ow!"
That's right.
Right. I can see a bunch of Republican candidates now. They'll say, "Okay, now we're gonna teach y'all how to speak in tongues today." Okay. Now we're going to start off with syllables. Okay, ta 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 ta. And every now and then just shake it. I said, this is called a quickening, and so no. That's right. And when you go to the Baptist church, we're going to teach you how to pew shout. But no, we don't have to. That gets to be ridiculous. But the funny thing is that the Republicans nullified the Johnson Amendment, which really made it legal for these churches to parade these candidates in their pulpits, which the black church has been doing for years, illegally, with putting their little tax exempt statuses in jeopardy and everything. But it was Republicans that nullified the Johnson Amendment that allowed that to take place without threat of having your tax exempt status revoked. And but we need to become more aware of what's going on around us and what we're actually doing. We need to become informed voters. How do you become an informed voter? How does that work? Well, we need to teach each other how to become informed. We need to look and see, these are my issues as it relates to judicial candidates. These are my issues as it relates to congressional candidates. These are my issues as it relates to the General Assembly. This is what function they have. This is what I expect from them. We don't have that. And there's nobody issuing scorecards from the black community for black people. And if there is, even in the organization I function in within Columbus, the NAACP, the national organization really might as well be an official arm of the Democratic Party. But the problem is they claim to be nonpartisan, but yet they're not. And that's one of the things I struggle to do in Columbus is to keep our branch free of major labor influence, the major political party influence, and it made it's not just the teachers, it's the AFL-CIO, it's it's the CME. There's all the major unions that have a grip on these civil rights organizations because they're shelling out money. They're shelling out money to them, and And you know, we don't need a lot of money to operate. We need money, but we don't need a lot of money to operate. As far as getting news and information out to people, especially in this digital age, we have methods of communication that I remember when we were making flyers, rolling them on the ink, you know, just rolling flyers out. But who had a Xerox machine when folks were stealing Xeroxes from their state jobs? And distribute them to the community.
Man, we could keep going because there's a lot that could be said. I'm just going to have you back. We'll just have to have you back sometime.
Be great. Look, I appreciate what you're doing, everything that you're doing from a conscious standpoint, from a musical standpoint, for what you're doing in the church. Just man, keep it up. Thank you for being the five individuals that you are, and a good husband, a great father, and we're just glad to have you in Columbus. It's a good thing to have a Shawn Thunder Wallace in Columbus.
Thank you, man. And as I said, we will definitely have to have you back.
Good.
And maybe in maybe a few months, like
a year or so, you know.
Well, I'm just saying. I'm just saying. You know, some of the stuff that we're talking about, I would actually like to see, like, you know. So we're still in this kind of pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder what it's going to be like on the other side of the pandemic.
Wow.
How much stuff do we, is going to go back to the way it was, and how much stuff is pretty much stuck where it is now, and how much of it is going to be a new normal. I think those would be interesting things to see.
We see things are moving rapidly, and it will be interesting.
Yeah. All right. God bless you, man.
Bless you, man. Take care. Good evening.
All right.